Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes as we wait for others to join. All right, I see our number of participants is still climbing. I'm just going to wait a little bit longer and then we'll get going. All right. Thank you for being here and participating in today's Supporting Healthy Minds and Youth Resiliency Funding Opportunity webinar. Before we get started, I have just a little bit of housekeeping to cover. This webinar will be recorded today so that others who cannot attend will be able to watch the presentation at a later time. And if you want to come back to it, the archived webinar will be made available on our webpage for this funding opportunity. In order to minimize our background noise, all participant audio will be muted during the presentation. That said, we're very interested in taking questions. So anytime throughout the webinar, if you have something come to mind, you can add it through the Q&A feature that you see on your screen. So take a moment to find that Q&A feature. You can use that, like I said, at any time to submit questions as we go along. We will respond to questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties today as we're going through, you can also enter anything into the chat. We'll have people monitoring that to make sure we're able to help you do troubleshooting as we need to do. All right, let's get started. As many of you already know, Colorado Health Foundation works to improve the health of Coloradans. And really, we do everything with the intent of creating health equity so that across Colorado, each of us can say we have all we need to lead healthy lives. The other cornerstones of our work are that we serve Coloradans who have less privilege and power and income, and we prioritize Coloradans of color. We are committed to being informed by the community and those we exist to serve. So as we move through the presentation today, I want to just help you get your bearings a little bit more within the context of the Colorado Health Foundation. So first, we have 4 focus areas for our work, and today's funding opportunity resides under our Nurture Healthy Minds focus area. In this area, we're addressing behavioral health needs across the state. We're focusing on social emotional development for young children. We're focusing on supporting adults with mental health and substance use challenges so that they can have support in their communities on their recovery journey. And then finally, the focus of today's conversation is around our efforts to equip youth and young adults with resiliency and coping skills. So under this priority, we are really working to support youth and young adults. Our age range is between 12 and 26 overall for the priority. And as we'll be talking more today, the emphasis today is really on middle school and high school age young people. So roughly between 12 and 18 years old is the focus of your work. And because of our emphasis on advancing equity, we pay close attention and have a specific focus in this area in supporting youth of color and LGBTQ youth in particular. So let's talk more about the funding opportunity itself. As I mentioned, we have a specific focus on the priority populations we want to work with in this opportunity. And this is really driven by what we know of the needs in this area. Most of you know variations on this theme from your work in your communities across the state. But I pulled just a few recent statistics that really are compelling and underscore for us that this is just essential work to be a part of. So this first figure is actually from 2019. And even at that time, through the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, we know that over a third of high school students at that time were reporting symptoms of clinical depression. From what we know through COVID, figures of young people who are experiencing depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges has only increased. And then as we look more deeply, we know that Black and Latinx young people report higher rates of symptoms of anxiety and depression than their white counterparts. And in fact, as we've lived through the last year, we know that Latinx and Black children are twice as likely to experience economic and health-related impacts of COVID-19. One figure that struck me was just even the increase in the last year of accessing mental health supports through the emergency room. And then finally, the other priority population for our work is really our LGBTQ young people. And the figure you see here is really showing again, this is a figure from the Trevor Project in a 2020 survey that they did. And it shows just what we experience is just staggering rates of considering suicide and symptoms of anxiety. And we know that these figures are even higher if we look more closely at our transgender young people. So let's talk about our response. We have done work in supporting healthy minds since 2018. And through what we've learned from many of you who are current grantees, our partners in the community, we have shifted our focus since that time, heading into this opportunity and really trying to pay attention to what are things that are really unique and need to be called out, explicit to the experience of young people of color and LGBTQ young people. And where we are going to be focusing in this opportunity is really stressing the ability of young people to grow their resiliency through identity, agency, and belonging. So we already know that young people in Colorado are demonstrating astounding resiliency. So many people have made it through this year still standing, and we know that there's an opportunity for us to come around young people to offer support, and that's what this project is about. So through this funding opportunity, organizations can seek up to 2 years of program or project support, and that can be for work that you've been doing for a long time that you find is even more essential now than it has been. Perhaps you see opportunities to enhance your programming, you need funding for that, or you'd like to expand it. We're open to all of those different avenues. I'll just pause here for a minute and let you take a look at kind of our draft definitions of some of the terms that we're using here in this opportunity. We know that identity, agency, and belonging help young people to really develop personal and interpersonal capacities, things like relationship development with peers and adults, problem solving, critical thinking, a sense of awareness, and a sense of self. And all of these are critical to strengthening their ability to be resilient and to cope. Our criteria, which many of you have probably already spent a little time with, are summarized here. And so again, we just know how important it is for all of those domains, identity, agency, and belonging, but in particular belonging, for there to be trusted relationships in place and coming together over a sustained period of time to build those relationships and to learn together is foundational. Secondly, we want to really support young people, as I said, as they continue to grow and develop their identity, agency, and belonging. And we'll be looking for that in the applications that you submit and how you tie that to their ability to really cope and thrive. And then finally, one of the things that we have learned, again, through our partnerships and community, and also the literature that's out there, and even critiques of how youth resiliency is usually approached, that we need to really respond to cultural dynamics of the groups that are involved. And that, you know, could happen in a variety of ways. Perhaps, you know, we're going to be looking for things like programmatic components that are designed or adapted to meet the needs of your particular young people, that your organization staff are bringing their lived and learned experience to the table so they really understand the needs, the identity, the culture of participants, and that your organization has a history with and is really trusted by the participants in the program. Finally, we are looking to see that you're really engaging with participants and they're helping to inform and guide and even implement the programmatic work that you're taking on. We have, since we started work in this area, supported over, well, I would say approximately 70 organizations, and we know that this work can be accomplished through a variety of programs. And so we've just listed a few. This is not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted you to see that we're really, we know that there are opportunities to build resiliency and coping skills in a variety of programmatic activities. All right, let me do a quick recap here. I shared earlier we're considering grants for up to 2 years through this deadline, which will be open on June 15th, and then again next June 15th. We don't have a formal cap on this opportunity, but based on our giving experience, we expect to have a grant award range of about $150,000 to $250,000. That would be over a 2-year time period. And if you do submit in June, then you will have a grant decision by mid-September. All right, so those are the basics for you. We want to open it up to questions now, and I know we hope to have some coming through our Q&A function. My colleague Angel and another colleague Dustin out. So you might get your response through the chat, or I'll take as many as I can just through live conversation. So Angel, thank you for your help. Dustin, thank you for your help. And we're going to just take a look at what's coming in. All right, I see there's a lot of interest in a question that has come in about how strong is the focus on BIPOC and LGBTQ populations? Is this open to programs that have high percentage of marginalized populations, but are open to everyone? Thank you for that question. So we are very committed to serving those two populations, but not exclusively. So some of the things that we'll be looking for is that, for example, a minimum of the young people served in your program should be about 50% of the young people BIPOC or LGBTQ identifying. And then the other thing that we're looking at is, what is the population in your community overall? And are you supporting at a minimum kind of a representative number of young people from those communities? So you may be working with young people that represent your whole community, but again, a minimum of half of them should be from the priority populations that we're elevating. And then the other thing I would say about that is that we're really interested in ways in which you are making sure that your program is elevating and understanding the needs of those groups, even as you're supporting the whole community. right, I see another one here. Do organizations need to focus their work on identity, agency, and belonging, or can they focus on just one? Well, I will tell you, we know that this is going to be a highly competitive opportunity, and we believe that all aspects, all three components are really fundamental. So we'll be looking for you to be integrating those into your programs. We have supported organizations that approach this in different and nuanced ways. Some of them might have a formal curriculum that really walks through these components. Others might just work with staff to really be trained in how do you bring an understanding of these into your ongoing work, and how do you know in ways that you're involving young people that they are experiencing encouragement and growth in these three areas. So it might happen in different ways, but we do want to understand how you're addressing all three.
Hillary, before you go on to the next question, would you please go back to the slide that defines identity, agency, and belonging?
Yes. Oops. I'll just leave this here, and then we'll be looking for questions for clarity as you spend some time looking at this too. I see a question at the top here. How separated does the out of school need to be? For example, would some components during lunch be permitted or out of class time, which might allow for greater access? Or does everything need to occur before or after school? That's a great question. For those of you who worked with us in our prior funding opportunity in this area, we did have more clear restrictions around out of school and in school time. For this opportunity, we're going to be more flexible. So we're going to be more focused on how you're able to achieve the criteria that are really outlined. And so there's, it could happen in a variety of ways. If you're in a school setting, we'd really turn it to you to understand how you're best able to achieve the criteria in that context. All right, I see another great one at the top here. Are clinical mental health treatment programs that work with children in addition to caregivers considered for funding? This gives me a great opportunity to underscore that we're actually really looking for non-clinical opportunities here. So there might be a program that integrates mental health treatment with other supports that are not treatment specific. And we'd be able to focus on the non-clinical side. So that's one element of the response. And the other thing is that we know that a lot of programs, in order to be culturally relevant and also to be as supportive as possible for young people in different situations, really benefit from there being a family component to the work. And so we have supported a number of those. We're always open to really understanding, and probably will inquire about kind of family dynamics as we're learning more about your work. All right. I'm going to ask this question here, and I might need help clarifying. So I might ask you to clarify more in the chat if we need. But looking at the array of youth programming slide, do organizations need to meet all three of the funding criteria? So the short answer is yes. So I'm going to go back to that funding criteria slide. Whether you are working in any of these or another structure of program, again, we're going to want to see how you are integrating or realizing all three of these criteria. So again, it doesn't have to be a formal curriculum. A lot of programs do that, but it could just be a really intentional way that you show that you understand the young people in the community you're working with, and how you kind of, through your interactions, are structuring things so that young people can demonstrate their agency through their engagement in the program or in their community, that you're able to think through how they have an experience of belonging, for example, and then we understand that responding to cultural dynamics is essential, whatever the context of the program. So the short answer is yes. All right. Based on your answer regarding the integration of identity, agency, and belonging, it sounded like programs do not need to be direct service to youth, but could support building adult capacity to work with youth on these topics. Oh, that's a great question. What has been challenging in applications that have only focused on capacity building is that it's harder for us to know how that work actually translates into realizing some of the other criteria. So if we're really trying to get a feel for on the ground impact of our investment and the experience and engagement of young people, that can be hard to do, but not impossible. And in that case, I'd suggest that you reach out to us so we can dig a little bit more into how you're approaching it, and we can give some more specific feedback on that one. All right, well, priority consideration. Oh, I lost that one. I think somebody answered it for us in the text. All right.
Sorry, Hillary, I moved it accidentally. The question is, will priority consideration be given to orgs that are also comprised of Black and BIPOC and queer people, in addition to providing services to BIPOC and queer 12 to 18-year-olds?
I want to find it so I can read it too. Sorry, that's my own shortcoming of how I process. All right, I see it. So that is such a great question, Amy, thank you. Well, we haven't established a formal priority for that. However, we also understand that organizations that are really led by the communities they serve often are able to really best demonstrate their responsiveness to the cultural dynamics of the engaged group. So in our experience, it is quite common for organizations that are also comprised of Black and BIPOC and queer people, as you put it, often are really doing some of the most compelling work as it relates to relevancy and really understanding and connecting with young people.
Hey, Hillary. Real quickly, there's a number of questions from our current partners in the Supporting Healthy Minds Youth Resiliency space asking about timing of reapplying for funds based on when their current grant ends. So didn't know if you could provide some guidance on that.
Sure. Yeah, so based on timing, if some of you were approved funding either in the fall of 2019 or early in 2020, I would encourage you to apply in this cycle and also talk with your program officer about kind of how to best navigate that. So it's a clearer one. If you applied in June 2019 and were funded through that cycle, this is clearly the path for you to come forward. If you applied in October of 2019 and were funded through that cycle, I think this is probably still the best deadline, but good to check in with your program officer and just, talk through things like, do you expect to have an extension? What we might do is just stagger the start so it aligns with when your prior grant ends. But those are some details we can talk about one at a time, particularly, again, for those in the who came through the October 2019 deadline. Oh, Judy's got a great question for us. Can you describe what you consider a sustained or longer period of time engaged? We have toyed around with whether to set an explicit time frame for that. I think the spirit of this is that we want to make sure that there's enough time for young people to really develop relationships, and that hopefully there's a way for those relationships to be sustained beyond maybe the participation in a short-term project. So some examples of what we wouldn't do. 1 or 2 week summer camp experience would not fit. Something that's, just a handful of times where a group meets together, that would not be as compelling as something that's either ongoing, it's a year-round experience, or something that happens, over several weeks or months. And in that case, if the program ends, we'll want to know how do those young people get support, or how do they remain connected outside of the formal program itself? So some groups have different alumni programs or other kind of peer mentorship programs that they connect young people with, or they might just have relationships with other community partners. So we'll want to just understand what is the lasting impact, and have you been engaged enough to really have those strong relationships in place? All right, our next question is, how much of program monies could be used for education of school populations and community populations? So if I read this right, Penny, and you'll have to chat if you have a clarification for me, but it sounds like you're looking at doing kind of an education type program. And if there's a health education program or something that's doing education a certain way, then, that's totally allowable. And we would just need to understand more about, again, the alignment with the criteria as we've discussed. Okay, we had a great question about this. What is the scale of programming that is preferred? Meaning, is there a minimum number of youth that should be impacted? We haven't set a minimum. And that said, we understand and really discuss at length through our grant review process different ways of considering impact. So for example, we're very committed to working in rural communities where there are just overall fewer young people, or there might be fewer young people with particular needs or identities that could benefit from support. And so we think about how impactful is it for them? What is the type of inequity that we understand it to be in terms of access to those supports? So we're really considering nuance of impact beyond just the number served. And that said, it's also a factor. So we don't have a formal number, though, that we're looking for. We don't have a minimum level. And that's another case. If you're feeling uncertain and you want to talk that through more with somebody, we would welcome a chance to just offer feedback and try to give you a better sense of how competitive what you're thinking about might be. All right, Casey asks, do you have an anticipated number of funded partners for this opportunity? Well, with our current budget, we're looking at probably 10 to 12 grantees in this first cycle. And we also know that there's significant demand. And so we're going to take a look at the applications and see if there's more we can do. This level of question is something that we are really transparent with our applicants about. So as we get into the process, we'll share with you kind of where we are with that. But right now, with what we know now, we're certain we can submit, or we can support between 10 and 12. All right. Yes, we got a question from McKenna. Can you clarify some examples of how organizations might utilize that third criteria, responding to the engaged group at community, programmatic, and organizational levels? Yes. Let me talk a little bit more about that. So one aspect that we ask you to consider is just at the programmatic level. All of these, I should say, are often very well, can be more successful if you're involving young people and potentially their families or other community partners in thinking this through. So we've seen, for example, in some communities, young people who come from families where their parents immigrated to the country and maybe they were born here, but they're living in two cultures. we've seen that having a real understanding of those dynamics at the programmatic level is important. And because the way those families operate, the young people and parents might have some parallel programming that relates to building their own understanding and their strength at working, kind of understanding one another and getting to know one another. So we're looking at how do you really take into account what is happening for the young people that you're serving? What do you know of the needs of their particular community, and how is your program designed kind of structurally as well as content to really meet their needs? So that's one example. Another that we talked about is just the organization staff bringing in real relatable experience. So at a minimum, this can mean the staff members might have a shared identity with the young people they're serving. They may have lived experiences. Let's say you're working with young people who are experiencing homelessness or unhoused. Then if you have staff members who have also experienced that, we know that that can really forge some important shared understanding and can support relationship building, helping young people feel maybe more understood and potentially more free to connect. Another thing that we've highlighted is that the organization basically has a history in working with this group, and it's trusted by participants. And so there are different things that we might be looking for in terms of assessing, is this a trusted organization? Some of which the organization can tell us, and sometimes we might be trying to talk with participants or with community partners about that. But some of it is, what roles has that organization been called to play over time as issues come up for the community? And there might be other ways of demonstrating that, but appreciate the chance to dig in a little bit more there, because we really do spend quite a bit of time really trying to understand some of those different components to how you're responding to cultural dynamics when you apply. All right. Can we include a portion of staff salaries and operating expense attributed to the program in this grant? Yes, both are the most commonly used and both are allowable. So again, program staff, you might have stipends for young people who are playing particular leadership roles in the program or project, or other community partners, and then administrative costs that relate to the work that you're doing is a very common additional expense that is funded. Should we already have a group built and then this would help build on that group, or can funding be used to recruit program participants to begin the work? Well, I think either are allowable. And in the case that you're starting something new, that's where we'd really want to learn more about why your organization is the best position to take this on. Why now? How are you starting by really starting to listen to and engage young people in the design of the program from the very beginning? So it's certainly allowable to do something new, and just know that we'll have a lot of questions about why your organization and how you're starting from the beginning to lean into some of the criteria and really embody that in your work.
And Hilly, while you're reading that, could you please forward on to the next slide?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm reading a great question from Pueblo's Youth Speak. The question, if I can summarize, is whether we can support scholarships to high school students. And if I read that correctly, I think we'd probably want to talk more with you about that project. And we'd probably want to think in terms of how could we support the program so that participants don't have to be responsible for the cost. We might want to think about it in a little bit different terms rather than a scholarship. So I hope I started to help answer that question, Jay, if I'm reading it right, but I would encourage you to talk with a program officer, and we'll be sharing some contact information at the end so you know where to go to deepen your conversation on that. Are the participants of the program supposed to be only LGBTQ and brown and black? If so, are they supposed to be accepted if they're being separated out? I'm not sure I followed the second part of the question, so please put any clarification in the chat, and I know Angel and Dustin will try to respond and can flag it for me if I need to say more. To circle back to something I led with a little bit earlier, you might have young people in your program who hold multiple identities. So you might have some white participants, some of them might be LGBTQ. You might have Latinx, Black, Asian American, Indigenous, young people in your program, and a mix of all of those. There are certainly cases where we've supported organizations that work with young people that hold multiple intersecting identities. What you should think about are a couple of things. What is best in service of really meeting the needs of the young people that you serve? And if you're working with a really diverse group, how do you hold space for that so that you can really be confident that you're being culturally responsive to people who are often marginalized, even in that context? So that's one way of thinking about it. And again, just as one touch point, at least half of the young people in your program should hold one of their identities as being a youth of color or LGBTQ. So I think I'll pause there. And if you have more clarifying questions on that one, that's another good one to talk more with a program officer about. I see we have a question on, would a peer support project fit within the guidelines? It sure could. We've supported programs in the past where that's one element of the work. And I certainly don't see why it couldn't meet some of the other criteria. So absolutely, if you feel like it fits other criteria, by all means. Do you see a vision for self-sustainability an important component or criteria? Judy, I might need you to also clarify this one. Yet, if you're speaking about kind of financial sustainability for the program, we don't see that as an important criteria. That is awesome if there's a model for that, for the work that you're doing. Yet we know a lot of the nonprofits that do work in the space don't have like a business model where they can have necessarily reimbursement for their services that they can count on. Although if there are opportunities for that, that's awesome. It's just not an expectation. A question here from Sydney. Our program utilizes a train the trainer model and operates in the school setting. While our team goes into each school, we serve several times per year. Each cohort may have a different level of engagement based on their particular teacher. How important is consistency and engagement across the entire program? Well, Sydney, I would say you would probably be challenged to demonstrate meeting that first criteria through this. Again, because we spend so much time really trying to understand the unique dynamics of who are the young people, who are the adults or staff in the space, and what is that consistency. You'd really have to be able to help us make some of those connections. And it sounds like that could be tough to predict in the model that you operate. Again, welcome more conversation about this, though, if you want to talk through more nuance there. can you speak to what type of deliverables you would like to see at the end of the project? What types of data should we plan on collecting through the project? Well, I'll say this gives me a great opportunity to talk about the fact that we will be doing some learning and evaluation work with the grantees that are selected. So let me respond first to your question, and then I'll say a little bit more about that. The way that we operate is we take a look through your application at kind of what are the main elements of your work for the year ahead. It might be key activities, it might be how many people you hope to serve, and in many cases, each organization that we funded has had an evaluation plan that they do themselves to really understand their impact on their goals with students. And so that might be done through a variety of ways. It might be done through, focus groups or conversation circles with young people, or it might be surveys, there might be other tools. So what we do if you're approved for funding is we have a grant agreement that will have kind of listed out a short set of what we call milestones that are key activities and deliverables that are really defined through the application itself. To build on that, we will also have a learning and evaluation partner on board that will help us work with all of the funded organizations as well as with young people from within those organizations to do more of a participatory model of understanding what's most impactful for young people and their experiences in programs like this, so that we can continue to evolve our understanding and our strategy, but also so we can really give back to each of the programs some reflections on, what is really working well and areas where they might have more opportunity to grow. All right, many youth of these ages are still exploring sexual identity, and we don't ask or require them to disclose that information. I wonder how best this is tracked, and without asking youth to disclose sensitive information that their families may not know about. Oh, I love that question. I think that we know that there are real limitations, and that you may not know for sure your exact numbers. I wonder if anyone on my team has specific examples that they could chime in on of how an organization did this, but something we could talk more about. Know that we would want to understand in those cases what do you know? What have young people disclosed to you, and how do you set up the space to be safe regardless of how a young person identifies? If they're not yet ready or comfortable, given their community context in sharing information, how do you create a space that feels safe without the requiring any sort of disclosure? It's a great question, Sarah. We can talk more about that if you'd like. So I see someone had a question on this screen. Can you clarify areas of interest, apprenticeship or job skills? Thank you. So we have supported at least, I'm thinking of maybe 3 different organizations that come up the top of my head that have done work in this area. So the model is often, maybe there's a summer work program, for example, where young people are building work skills. They might be getting paid for the work that they're doing. And at the same time, some of these supportive elements around identity, agency, and belonging are integrated really purposefully. And that happens both in terms of maybe like retreat days with the team of young people that's employed, and also extensive training with the staff that's working with the work crews, so that they're really always ready to have conversations about issues that come up and create a really safe and inclusive process for the participants who are quite diverse from one another. There's another, I think there are a couple of other examples too, where the focus is on really meeting young people who, their first motivation might be economic security or making some money. And there is an opportunity in that context to also really bolster their social emotional well-being in the process. So that might look a few different ways. We have, like I said, just a handful of examples that we could share more offline. If you want to connect with any of those groups, I'm happy to share. If we have program elements that hit all the examples of work, should we focus on describing particular elements? Judy, I think I would encourage you to find time to talk with someone about that, but I will just say, especially if I don't answer your question, I would say, whatever you're seeking funding for, you should focus on explaining the connections between those elements and the criteria that we outlined. So you may do a whole host of things, but you're seeking funding for a smaller subset. I'd focus your time there, and we would have time through conversation to learn more about the breadth of what your organization does. Hopefully that's helpful. I see Robin offered just a note of thanks to the question raised about LGBTQ data collection. She noted there would have to be an IRB in place with such information if it's gathered with the school population. All right, with the evaluation question and answer, will the Health Foundation require that grantees survey youth with a different tool or question than we're already using? Or are you thinking more of a focus group evaluation model? It's important for us to know as we're struggling with too many surveys. Well, let me just say the way that we're thinking about setting this up, we're just about to release our request for qualifications. And so over the next month and a half, we'll be considering different responses to that. So we haven't selected our partner, and we will be designing with them and with you and young people what the design for the evaluation should be. So in short, if you were to tell us we really shouldn't do a survey because we're doing too many surveys and there are other methods, then we would listen to that and not do surveys. I think we're definitely more in the camp of how can we really do sense making in a different way with young people. So I would anticipate that surveys wouldn't be the top of our list for that. I'm going to pause just for a little bit longer here. We don't have any questions in the chat now. So if you've just been waiting to see if someone else is going to ask your question, now is your big moment to put it out there. All right. All right, we're gonna shift forward. I really hope that today's information is giving you what you need to feel more informed about whether or not you submit at our upcoming deadline. This will also give you a little bit more information. If you have more questions,
Hillary, we've had a couple more come in.
Oh, too late. Just kidding. Let me look. Oh, are organizations outside of Colorado able to apply? Yeah, we don't limit if there's an organization that's based outside of Colorado, though we would only support work that is with young people in Colorado. And we'd be looking to understand how you meet the criteria specific to cultural relevancy and whether you have a history of kind of trusted relationship and partnership with the community you're looking to serve. All right, we have a question about September funding release. Will there be any decisions made before then? Probably not. We usually have if we have early declinations where we see that there's just not a clear alignment up front, you would hear probably sooner than that. Otherwise, we're pretty consistent with being close to mid-September. And as you get into the process, your program officer would communicate really openly with you about what our schedule looks like. We often need to have the applications come in before we can get really firm on that. Oh, I see the survey is a hot topic. Surveys are a big topic these days, logic models, getting the questions right. Can CHS give us more info on how to get this right from the beginning? Oh, what a big question, Caroline. Angel or Dustin, could you, I'm trying to think of where I saw this recently. If you guys have it handy, could you share a link to the equitable evaluation materials that we have? I think I just saw it on the website recently. But if not, Caroline, I can follow up. If you would just shoot me an email or send it to the funding email address that we have up on the screen now, I'm happy to follow up with some information on that. And as we go into doing more work with the funded set of grantees, we'll spend some time with everyone sharing more about kind of what we've learned about different ways to approach evaluation more equitably.
And Hillary,
so,
I just dropped that as a response to Caroline's question.
Awesome.
The CHF resources.
Great, thank you. Okay. So I think where I was going is if you have a relationship with a program officer and you have more questions after today's conversation, please reach out to them directly. We'd love to talk with you more and help you navigate. If you don't have a relationship yet, please use the funding@coloradohealth.org address you see here. If you choose to join our mailing list, you'll be among the first to know of new funding opportunities as they come up. And we sure hope you follow us if you're interested in staying connected to our community and the things that we're learning and that we care about. All right. Thank you all very much. Please take care and appreciate your interest in potentially working together.